Neuroscience, past, present, and future. Neuroscience is a multidisciplinary field that analyzes the nervous system to understand the biological basis of behavior. Today's neuroscience is an extremely broad field. The knowledge of brain was known far back in the prehistoric times. Recent development of neuroscience has made it called the golden age because this is a time when the major breakthrough of neuroscience has happened within the last 20 years. The term neuroscience was introduced in the 60s to start a new era in which each discipline could share a common concept, language, and goal. Normal and abnormal brain, diseases related with brain. Now we have gone far beyond to analyze the molecular biology of nerve cells, genes coding the proteins needed for nervous system function, and to the biological basis of normal and abnormal cells. We've also learned the effect of environment on brain cells. Neuroscience currently is one of the most rapidly growing field in science, and brain is referred to the last frontier in biology. So neurobiology is a branch of biology that analyzes the nervous system to understand the biological basis of behavior. And neuroscience is one of the most rapidly growing areas in science. Indeed, brain is referred to as the last frontier. Growing up, we acquire skills, challenges, experience, knowledge, and became aware of the difficulties and rewards of living. Today's neurobiology class, the lecturing, asking questions, or any other activities like throwing a ball, going to sleep, singing, dancing, all activities are essentially, we all would ask one universal question: how does the brain work? Since we need the involvement of brain at every point in our lives, it is almost a must that we know the structure and the function of the brain in order to make logical decisions. Let's go over the past views of neuroscience. What we know today is all an accumulation of information from the past. So, origins of neuroscience, different views of the brain over the past years and years. What we have today is an accumulation of what we have accumulated from the last years, from the prehistoric times. Starting with the prehistoric times, ancient Egypt, then going into ancient Greece, the Roman Empire, the Renaissance, the 7th and the 8th centuries, Renaissance to the 19th century, the 19th century, and then the 20th century, which is now. The prehistoric times, the prehistoric ancestors, and appreciated the importance of brain and considered it vital of life. They performed Burr-Hole operations called trepanation, that is exposing the dura mater in order to treat patients with intracranial diseases. We learn about dura mater when we learn about brain. Initially, it was thought the procedure was done as a ritual, but later it was found that there were holes or drills that show signs of recovery, indicating that it was not a ritual, but a routine procedure. The Burr-Hole operation, although modified a lot, is still used in several hematomas. Views of ancient Egypt. The Egyptians believed that heart and not the brain was the seat of soul and memory. Going to ancient Greece, they found a correlation between structure and function of the brain. Difference in suction structures govern the function of head or brain. It was responsible for sensations and actions, like closing your eyes, and several other sensations. Later, Hippocrates, the father of medicine, briefed that brain was not only involved in sensation, but also was a seat of intelligence. The Roman Empire, Galen, the famous physician, was able to divide the brain into two parts, cerebrum and cerebellum. He deduced the function from the structure. He was able to dissect the brain and find that cerebrum was rather soft and related to sensation, and cerebellum was hard and related to motor functions or muscles. Even now, the analysis holds true. We further dissected the brain and found whole spaces called ventricles, which we also now know that we have four ventricles in the brain. But he at that time said that there were fluids, four different kinds of fluids that fill up the ventricle, which was later proven to be untrue. The views of the Renaissance. Descartes also believed in the fluid mechanical theory. Fluids are forced out of the ventricles through the nerves, which literally pump you up and cause the movement of the limbs. He also believed that there is something outside of the brain called mind, which was related to spirituality. He believed that mind is a spiritual entity that receives sensation and command movements by communicating with machineries of the brain via the pineal gland. We learn about pineal gland, which is an endocrine gland and produces hormones. Then came the 7th and the 8th century. Later, scientists took a closer look at the brain sections and found two regions, gray and white regions. White matter, because it is continuous with the nerves of the body, was believed to bring information to and from the body, which was correctly thought. The nervous system was divided into two parts eventually. One was a central division, and the other was a peripheral division. The central division was the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral division were the spinal nerves and the cranial nerves. In addition, there were bumps in the brain, which were called gyri and sulci. We still call them by the same name. This enabled the brain to be divided into two halves, and it has multiple functions that were developed. So by the end of the 8th century, certain conclusions were made. Injury of the brain can disrupt sensation, movements, and can cause death. The brain communicates with body via the nerves. The brain has different identifiable parts which perform different functions. The brain operates like a machine and follows the law of nature. With these four major conclusions, we led into the next part, which was the 19th century, where two researchers that was responsible for determining the interaction between electricity and brain in the 19th century. They were Luigi Galvani and Emile du Bois-Reymond. And these two famous scientists were able to detect the nerves communicate through electrical signals, a landmark in the neurobiology or neuroscience study. Going ahead, it was found that within the 19th century, more and more information were obtained by the time Benjamin Franklin had discovered electricity. It was speculated that nerves are like wires. Why? Why are nerves considered as wires? Muscles can twitch when nerves are electrically stimulated. So nerves conduct electrical signals to and from brain. Each nerve is made up of many filaments called nerve fibers, and each one has a different direction. Number 3, nerves attach to the spinal cord. The fibers are divided into 2 branches. Dorsal root enters the spinal cord, and the ventral root leaves the spinal cord. Later it was found that cutting the ventral root caused paralysis. Number 4, a set of nerve fibers brought in information to the brain and spinal cord, and other controlled the muscles. Thus came the concept of sensory and motor nerves, and transmission was strictly in one direction. Then came the localization of specific functions of different parts of the brain. Since the region of the spinal cord was related to specific functions, so scientists started exploring brain for localized function at several regions. Charles Bell thought that cerebrum was the seed of sensory fibers and cerebellum was for motor functions. Mary Jean Pierre, Florence, did some ablation experiments to prove that cerebrum was involved in sensation and cerebellum, motor function, confirming Galen's theory. Franz Joseph Gall made a connection with the personality trait and skull. The theory was called phrenology, which became very popular at that time. Since the shape of the skull was not the same as the brain, this theory was considered erroneous and discarded. Phrenology, bumps on the skull structure of the skull reflect the brain surface is related with traits. So as you can see in this picture, different region of the skull they thought was related with different, personality traits of different people. But however, the theory was erroneous and discarded. Before we go into further, one last information I would like to say is Paul Broca was able to correlate, another famous scientist. Paul Broca was able to correlate structure and function. He had a patient who was not able to speak but could understand. After the death of the patient, it was found that there was a lesion on the frontal lobe of the brain which related with speech. This region is called Broca's region, which is related to speech and learning comprehension. This is still holds true. We do have a Broca's region in the brain. This localization, this slide in here shows you how humans have evolved from mouse to monkeys to humans. We do follow or have some common traits regarding the structure and function of the brain, the size of the brain, and the folds in them in the brain have evolved over the years. With this, slowly and steadily, around the same time, what happened was there were technical advances. in microscopy, especially during the 1800s. And this gave the scientists an opportunity to observe animal tissues at high magnification. In 1839, German geologist called Theodor Schwann proposed what is known as the cell theory. All tissues are composed of microscopic units called cells. And he proposed the cell theory, which still holds true. Cell theory, what is the cell theory? The cell is a basic structural and functional unit of life. Organismal activity depends on individual and collective activity of the cells. Biochemical activities of the cells are dictated by subcellular structures, that is, within the cells, there are subcellular structures. Continuity of life has a cellular basis. For nerves, the neuron is the basic functional unit of the brain. At this point, it was thought that nerve cell did not follow the cell theory. Going forward, which we are now, which we can call as the reductionist approach, there are several levels how we can analyze cells or a group of cells, organs, organ systems at different levels. But the study of neuroscience continues. It is extremely important and an extremely evolving field. Scientists that study neuroscience are called neuroscientists, and there are several other fields related to neuroscience. In addition, animal research is an extremely important part of the neuroscience research programs, and it has its own benefits. I want to actually go ahead and ask you to observe one, I would say, an episode in Netflix, which is called Crocodile, Black Mirror. This episode is the third episode, I think, of the fourth series in Black Mirror. That will give you an idea of the future of neuroscience, how brain can be. Please don't take the episode so seriously, but it will give you an idea of what we are thinking about or what is or can happen in future, how our brains we might be able to see, be able to record and analyze that data. It's an interesting and a scary episode. So please, if you get a chance, in Netflix, Crocodile, Black Mirror. The last is there are several detrimental, some are detrimental, some can be retrieved, some are neurodegenerative diseases associated with the nervous system. So as we go along throughout the course, we will be touching upon many of them. Some of them you will be presenting, and you will see as we go along that we will know more and more about brain, we'll know more about spinal cord, and we will come to know the nervous system disorders. The last slide, there are several neuroscience Nobel Prize winners, which I think we should all be acknowledging. In 1906, criminology for structure and of the nervous system got an award. Kyle, Santiago, again, they shared the Nobel Prize together for the structure of nervous system. And in 2017, Jeffrey Hall, Michael Rochberg, and Michael Young shared the Nobel Prize on discoveries of molecular mechanism controlling the circadian rhythm. Thank you.